Hi, everyone. We're going to look at an issue that at first will sound odd. It's what does the Kennedy assassination issues have in common with the rise of Trinitarianism between 325 AD and 381 AD? Hmm. You probably never heard of this subject matter before. Well, I kind of am doing that to. It's a kind of a mental exercise to make some points and see by comparing two events very well separated in time. Look at the similarities. Another way of looking at it is, what does the Nicene Conference report and the Warren report have in common? All right, so we're just going to basically ask some fundamental questions. If Jack Ruby assassinates Oswald, what else must be true? And we're going to also ask if the Trinity doctrine is supported in certain unethical ways or dishonest ways, what else must be true? Right? Okay. So we'll look at that, and we'll see that the Nicene report has to do what? It has to whitewash the unethical activities of the Trinity party. And I'm not talking about Trinitarian believers, because they are the ones who are the victims of the Trinitarian leaders who are perpetuating these crimes against the Trinitarian believers. Okay, that's my point. And similarly, we've got to whitewash this whole report about Oswald and the Warren Commission, so that it doesn't look like anybody but him is involved, and can't, the fact that Ruby assassinates him 2 days later, it has to be just simply forgotten and written out of the story. So if you talk about the Kennedy assassination, everybody forgets about Jack Ruby, who's the most important figure in the whole thing. Why in the world is he assassinating this man 2 days later? 2 days later. And he's not a crazy person, and he's not a pro-Kennedy person. Why is he stepping out and killing somebody, murdering him? And he doesn't even say, "I'm doing it because I felt bad about the president being killed." He says nothing. He sits in a jail, and he gets sick a few years later, and he's dead in 67, so he dies 4 years later. Why did he kill somebody and could have stayed, and he got a fatal illness while he was in there? He wasn't on death row or anything when he committed the murder, so he would have served in jail for decades. Why did he do that? So the question is, if Oswald was acting alone, why, and nobody else was at risk for what he's doing and being blamed for it, why did Ruby assassinate Oswald? And then why does the Warren Commission say he acted alone? That was the first result. Okay, so we'll begin our little test of these things. Okay, so we'll just begin with some basic similarities. You have Arius on one side in the Trinitarian disputes. He gets blamed for the non-Trinity view, even though he's just simply citing Colossians 1 verses 15 to 17. That's where Paul says Jesus is not God. You got to read it with obvious point. He's saying Jesus is the first begotten of creation. And then through him, the Father created through Jesus, all things were created, and nothing was made without him, and so on and so forth. So Jesus is sort of a co-creator with God. So, and that's why the early church often thought Jesus was like an angel, because he was a co-creator, and that would be explained why he's so important, but he's not human. He doesn't start out as human. He starts out in this other realm, and then you have the Father separate from him. So that was the Colossians view, and that's what Arius believed in adamantly. And you're never told that when you're told about the Trinitarian dispute, because then you think poorly of Paul. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. It's mind games of the Trinitarian party. The leaders commit that upon their followers, so they don't see these things. But that's a fact. That's what Arius was defending, and that's what he was being persecuted for. Now, there's a third view that never gets presented at Nicaea, and that is that Jesus is what he said he was. I'm the Son of God. I'm the Messiah. The Father dwells in me. That's John 14:10. The Word came to dwell in me at my baptism is when it really happens, but that's been taken out of the Bible. We'll get to that later. So this is the view that Arius is to be blamed for all the dissent in the church, and he's going to be banished. All his books are going to be destroyed in order destroyed by people that side with him and believe that he's correct. All get banished and excommunicated from the church. And then on the other side, you have Oswald. He's solely blamed for the assassination of the president, even though he insists, he verbally insists, I never killed anybody. What are you talking about? He was like shocked that anybody thought he killed the president. And frankly, it sounds actually credible when you watch the video that he doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. He thinks they're claiming he just shot a police officer, which is serious, and killed him. But he even denies that. I didn't kill anybody. But then he shot 2 days later and killed and murdered by a guy named Jack Ruby, who runs a couple of, nightclub type things. And that's it. So if it's true that he is murdered within 2 days of having killed the president of the United States, what else must be true? And that's kind of what I'm going to say in both situations. If the Trinity were true, why would the Trinity and the deity of Christ principles at Nicea and then later in Constantinople in 381, why would they have to be based on lies and frauds and crimes against the Bible texts? Seriously, why would it if it were true? Just like in Oswald, why would anyone have to assassinate Oswald if he's the only one involved and the person killing him is not insane? Okay, so you can just see the point I'm making is the same point. You only have to kill Oswald if there's something you want to hide. You only have to use fraud and deception with the Trinity if there's something you want to hide. So in each instance, there's the people who are trying to create the Warren Report, the people who are trying to create the Nicene Council Report, both have a motivation apparently for lying and defrauding people so that we don't see the bigger picture. So let's see if I can prove these points to you on both scores, just so you get the bigger picture. And see, and so looking at the Kennedy assassination lets you be more objective and see, okay, yeah, what about this guy Ruby? So let's take a look at that. And you just they put you in a neutral frame of mind where you can say, you know what, he's got a point. Why did Ruby assassinate Oswald? That's the big question that nobody ever touches. And I'll show you how it's addressed though to make me. Okay, so to put it a slightly different way, if Jack Ruby kills 2 days after Kennedy is killed by someone, and he's only learned this third hand that Oswald is an accused, right? So he's just a member of the public, has no personal knowledge. What is the only possible rationale for him to kill Oswald? There has to be something that he knows, that Oswald knows, that he needs to hide. So in other words, he knows that Oswald is somehow involved, or at least knows who the killer is, and needs to kill that person. And he's going to actually, instead of letting justice take a course, if this is the guilty party, we know in the United States, if you assassinate the president of the United States, you will be, it's a death penalty under the Constitution, I think, if not every statute there is on the books. So he knows he's going to die by doing this, and he's doing it anyway. So whoever it is, whatever his friends are that he's trying to protect, are very powerful people, and he'd rather do something outrageous like go out to the police station while Oswald is being moved from the police station to be taken to court to be arraigned, and being taken into a car and being protected, bodyguards with guns and everything on them, supposedly. You're taking a big risk that you'll even survive. But why would you do that? How would you have any confidence that you're going to get through and pull that off? We're going to see later at the very end. We're going to show you something special was happening in favor of him when he goes to the police station, and we'll explain why when we get there. So anyway, this is just using the logic, and then the same logic will apply to the Trinitarian thing. So if the Trinitarian party had to use, number one, coercion to exile and banish those who did not agree with the Trinity, this was imposed on 5 of at least 215 people. 215 people were there. They would be banished or exiled, which is effectively death, to get the consent at Nicaea in 325 AD. And then thereafter, they unfoiled 5 hidden frauds post 325 AD upon Scripture to obtain ongoing consent and improve basically their chances for getting acceptance. So what does this show about whether the Trinitarians thought their assertion was truly true, rather than was solely to please a pagan ruler back in 325 AD? And so I also say this to myself: all this evidence of coercion and killing and fraud and all of that proves one thing: they cannot defeat John 17:1-3, because that was the only verse that Arius started with. He started, let's start there. And that's when Constantine came back with his idea that God has a material being, and he has substance, and he can share with Jesus, and so his substance is eternal. Therefore, that eternal substance was put in Jesus. Therefore, Jesus is eternal. Therefore, Jesus is an eternal Son. And we get a God who looks just like a pagan ruler's favorite god named Apollo. He's God the Son of the sun in the sky, is also the son of God Horus. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot in common between the Kennedy assassination cover up and the cover up the Trinitarians have been doing very poorly, by the way. It's very easy to expose them, and it's just our media and even our Wikipedia pages seem to indulge these editings that make it look the Nicene Conference looks like this consensual decision was made, as we'll see. Okay, and so now I just want to talk a little bit about the Kennedy assassination. So I really never study it. I don't care about it that much, and I just know certain facts about that case never made sense to me. Is what is the reason for Jack Ruby to assassinate Lee Harvey Oswald within 2 days of the and within 2 days of Oswald killing the president, and then we're supposed to believe there was never any conspiracy to kill the president, and it's all Oswald's doing. And somebody just comes along and wants to shoot him, gets by all the police, stands there, and the police are not covering the front of Oswald, and he gets shot in the chest with a fatal single shot, perfectly placed into his side. I mean, come on. Just, you have to really be incredulous to think that's true. That's my point. If Ruby kills Oswald, what else does it tell you is true? The Warren Report is a whitewash. It's designed to put everyone at ease. There's nothing here to look at. Just like the Nicene summaries will be, just don't look over here. It's nothing. It's a decision, a rational decision made by all these bishops with contemplation, objectively discussing, debating, and all that. And we'll get to that later. So here's the Wikipedia. Jack Leon Ruby. He was born Jacob Leon Rubenstein. It will be important that you know he's Jewish. You'll see why. He was an American nightclub owner and alleged associate of the Chicago outfit who murdered Lee Harvey Oswald. And that's alleged. That's not proven. So I don't know that we know there's any connection with him in the mob, but some people say that. Who murdered Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24th. The president was killed 2 days earlier by somebody. 2 days after Oswald was accused of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. A Dallas jury found Ruby guilty of murdering Oswald and sentenced him to death. I mean, it's done on video. Like, there's no dispute. Ruby's conviction was later appealed, and he was granted a new trial. However, he became ill in prison and died of pulmonary embolism from lung cancer on January 3, 1967. In 1964, the Warren Commission concluded that Ruby acted alone in killing Oswald. Now, that's kind of, well, let's put it this way. Did Oswald act alone is really the issue, and why would Ruby kill him unless there was something that needed covering up? So, and it claims, this is a Warren Commission, the whitewash is going on, that Ruby acted on impulse and out of grief over Kennedy's assassination. He was just so sad. And by the way, notice there was no claim that he did it due to any mental illness, because in 1964, he yet had not shown any signs of that. You're going to see later, many years later, he's going to show signs of that when he's on reappeal, and he could actually be using an insanity defense and setting it up, just so you know. So you don't know. But he never is too crazy. He's just despairing, and you will see. I'm going to mention to you. Anyway, it's an absurd myth that he shot him on impulse and grief over the Kennedy assassination. He wasn't political. He wasn't in grief. He never gave that reason at the time. And if he did, why don't you tell us right away? You know, while the country is grieving for the loss of their president, maybe if you did kill it for revenge, people could understand that, and that would get you sympathy. But he doesn't say any of that. He's a little nightclub owner, and he's a police snitch. That's what he's known as. So he picks up little criminal activity going on and people who are at his nightclubs, and he tells the police about it. Just, between you and me, this is what is going down. Boom, boom, boom. That he's a low life person, but he's not a murderer. He has no violent crime on his record. He's just like, he must have done this because he was hired to do it. And he could do it because he could get into the police station because he's a regular snitch. If he shows up at the door and says, I got something on this guy or that guy, they'll listen to him. And he lets the police into his club and gives free vodka away. So there's all kinds of that going on. So, and then there's a story, I put it together so I could read this myself. This is somebody who's pro, Jack Ruby did this out of grief and a moment of temporary insanity. Just here it is. He says, Ruby's fragmenting Jewish identity played a significant role in events that led to the killing of Oswald and the loss of his sanity. Okay, so they can't help themselves, these people. It's just like the Nicene Conference is summarized to whitewash what's really going on there, and we're going to expose the part that they don't want you to see. And as Trinitarian followers, you need to know what the Trinitarian leaders were doing and why they were doing it, and that would convince you, I think, that what you're seeing and what you are believing is mirrors and smoke, corruption of biblical text. So I want you to actually distrust all the texts you think support the Trinity, that you think support them. I'm going to review several of them today, but they're not real. They're all smoke and mirrors. And it's exactly like they do this Jack Ruby thing. They blow everything out of proportion. So here's one. Ruby told his sister, hearsay, that the government authorities were engaged in murdering 25 million Jews. Do we know that? Do we have any proof of that? It's a sister says it. Maybe to get her brother off, save his life. He's trying to make a claim that he's insane. And most importantly, it's years after the fact. So it does not explain anything. So, but this is the argument, and here's the argument. Ruby, in any literature of this period, Ruby at most rates as a footnote. And that's a code word for telling you, the reader, just ignore this guy's role in history. Because, if you think too hard about it, you might ask yourself, how could Oswald be acting alone? Or if he's the guilty party, how could his, death just be an act, coincidence that somebody would come in and risk his life and be guilty beyond guilty? He's on camera, he's on video, he's killing a famous person. And he has no chance of escape. He will be himself sentenced to death in the electric chair in those days in Texas. This is like the most insane place to do this. It was literally like throwing your life away by killing this guy there, but you were doing it because of something else, maybe big cash payoff. I mean, he does hang out with those kind of people. He lives on that kind of life. And they call it a moment of insanity. So in other words, you and I are supposed to believe that there was nothing he was trying to cover up. He wasn't trying to protect somebody from being exposed through something that Oswald would say. And now I want you to listen. We're going to listen to Oswald a little bit, because it just tells you, when you just listen to him, he is adamant that he had nothing to do with the Kennedy assassination. As they're walking him through the police station, he says, I don't even know why I'm being arrested. They've not told me yet why I'm being charged. And I believe it. Nobody wants to tell him anything. And they won't let him have an attorney. Think about that. There's something wrong in this arrest sequence. And the defendant is not acting like a normal defendant, which is, if you're guilty, you don't speak. He's acting like he's truly innocent. And he's speaking up and he's saying, I don't even know why they're arresting me. Tell me, please, somebody tell me. And he's doing it on camera multiple times. So we'll take a look at that.
Have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
Did you shoot the president?
I didn't shoot
The shots
anybody.
that killed him?
Has any identification been attempted for the killing of the president?
Not yet.
Oswald, did you shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
You have a lawyer?
No, sir, I don't.
I'd like some legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any.
I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that.
Did you shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man!
Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
It was a calculating man who slew the presidents of these United States today. He had to be.
I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me anything. Except that I'm accused of murdering a police chief. I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have been. Nobody said what?
Sir?
You have been. Nobody said what? Okay, we ain't here. Okay. What did you do in Russia?
A policeman hit me.
In Dallas, the prime suspect still is being questioned. He is 24-year-old Lee Oswald of Dallas, a former Marine who spent some time in Russia, who at one time had applied for Soviet citizenship. He has been associated with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Shooting himself, and Dallas Police Chief Just Curry describes him as a stoic individual who admits nothing. He believes he's being held because he once lived in Russia. Oswald, who said 2 years ago he wanted Russian citizenship, was fined $10 recently in New Orleans for distributing communist literature. He's married to a Russian woman who was brought to the police station with their small daughter and his mother, who lives in a Dallas suburb. She was also questioned and said, "I am heartbroken about this. He is really a good boy." Oswald's only comment to the world at large since his arrest has been a denial.
Appeared at the police station during the night carrying a small child. Oswald married her in the late 1950s when he was in Russia trying to renounce his American citizenship. Mrs. Oswald, who speaks only limited English, seemed stunned by all that was happening to her and her husband. Police said she told them that her husband owned a gun matching the description of the one believed used in the assassination of the president.
Here comes Oswald down the hall again.
You find that rifle? That's as fast as you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges.
Oswald has hustled through a doorway. He says he has nothing against anybody. He has not committed any act of violence. Oswald makes this claim as he's hustled from the interrogation room through a doorway, down an elevator, up an elevator.
I've been photographing the teacher, and now they're taking me to the line up. Among these men, that will be kicked out. Right?
Oh, God, we got to indoctrinate these guys.
Okay, now I think it's very revealing that it says he's going to be held as a patsy, meaning he understands that, somebody has now mentioned to him the president of the United States has been killed. He knows he's applied. You're going to learn in a second. He's applied for citizenship in Soviet Union. His wife he married is from the Soviet Union, and I looked today through some of the records that have been released recently, and they just show he's seeking to emigrate at about this time back to the Soviet Union, where his wife's family is, and no big deal. I mean, there's nothing out of the ordinary, and even we have all these intercepts of the messages between him and the Soviet embassy and the Cuban embassy, and they're all we're listening in on their communications, and we're typing them all up. And they're having no familiar conversations about anything that could associate him with assassinating the president of the United States. So this is what I would conclude. Okay, and the other thing is, if a person is guilty, they're going to clam up. They will say nothing until a lawyer is present. I think even then they knew that. He's asking for a lawyer. He's saying at first, when he's arrested, the only thing he says, "I've been told that I shot a police officer, and I haven't done that." And then he still doesn't know what the charge is, and he says, "Well, these reporters told me that supposedly the president of the United States has been shot. I know nothing about that either." So the frankness of the way he's speaking is important. And I just want to say this is that's why there's always two sides to every story. That's why you have to have trials, because the things that you can't see on a piece of paper is the emotion between of how someone says something, and whether it sounds credible or not. And it actually sounds completely credible to me that he did not have anything to do with it. And I don't care about this thing. And I've never watched these videos for all these years, and I haven't even seen this Oliver Stone movies. I don't follow the Kennedy assassinations. It's just I'm trying to use, what if this was true? What else is true? So in other words, it'd be easy for me to say, well, then Ruby's going to kill him to cover up something that he and Ruby are involved in. But what rather it seems to me is this man knows something whoever wants him dead needs to destroy. So here's what I say. We know he did not kill. We know that Ruby isn't killing anybody in a moment of insanity. He's a regular person. Now, that means we know Oswald was killed to silence him because of something, because his testimony could hurt the guilty in one of either two ways. One, Oswald could exonerate himself, and thus the true killer must be caught. So one thing is, if people can pin the blame on Oswald, then the case is closed, and you don't need to find anybody else. You put it on the patsy, you get him tried and executed, and you're done. And if he doesn't know who killed him, that would be to your advantage. But he may very well have a good idea of who would be involved in trying to kill the president. Or two, Oswald could implicate himself in a deal. So let's say Oswald did shoot the president, but let's say people are paying him to do it, or he's doing it with other more powerful people that the government would rather get them instead of him. He's a small level person. And maybe he didn't even shoot the trigger, because, I mean, there's all kinds of arguments about how can anyone shoot from that book repository. It'd be a 1 in a million shot. He was trained to be a shooter, but, even the best shooter can't count on that shot at that point, and from that range, and from that height and that angle, and to a moving car. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. You'd be better off to pick a much better angle. I mean, I'm not a shooter, but that's what they say. You should have had a much better angle. So the second option is he could implicate himself in a deal to let the government find someone else more guilty, liable. So there were strategies that he would have used that by killing him, they no longer exist. So the way to analyze things and think like a lawyer is, if this was really Oswald acting alone, why in the world would Ruby have killed him? So the answer is he wouldn't. He in this case, he's not insane. He's not a Kennedy aficionado. He's not a political. Ruby is not a political person. So Ruby is simply acting on behalf of somebody who wants to see Oswald dead, because he's talking already. He's on video camera. So you got to see those videos that I just showed you now. They're out there for at least 2 days. And that's when Ruby acts. So he can see that Oswald is talking and chatty and doesn't seem afraid to talk to anyone. And he doesn't have an attorney yet. And so this attorney's not going to, until he gets an attorney usually gets to know the truth. So this is the first thing that your client usually tells you is, if you're a criminal attorney, I'm sure, well, here's what's really going on. Because if you don't tell your attorney, he can't really help you. So this is what would be the danger. If he gets an attorney, the attorney's going to know the truth too. And by the way, that's whoever's involved. Let's say the state somehow is involved, the state of Texas. I don't know. If they were involved, they don't want to get an attorney, because that attorney is going to learn this. And now the truth can't be suppressed. So whatever's going on here, abnormal behavior. Police are not giving the guy any attorney. And in a most high profile case there can possibly be, the shooting of the president of the United States, no attorney. You're denying him right to counsel. It's a guarantee in our Constitution. It's been affirmed by the Supreme Court just before 1962. I mean, come on. This is not. We have moved beyond the 1860s. So this is a bizarre set of circumstances. And so I just say this: ask yourself, if Oswald acted alone, never had any complicity with anybody else, then nobody else would have ever had any motive to shoot and have him killed. Therefore, that since somebody obviously asked this petty little guy who never shot and killed anybody in his life, we want this guy eliminated. Can you get it done? You have an in at the police station. You're the station snitch. So you can get in there, you can get in the crowd, and they'll not think you're anything at risk, and you can shoot him. And he says, sure. And the thing that's interesting is Ruby knew exactly how to shoot him. Shot him on the right side, which is the left side, meaning where his heart is. So shooting him on the right side up into the cavity was a death shot. So that was a very calculated shooting. It was an execution is really what it was. He had to shoot to kill. He couldn't just wound him. That would do no good. He had to be dead. And he gave him that fatal shot. So that's what I conclude from that video clip, that this man likely was innocent. I know it sounds crazy, right? But it sounds like he's completely innocent. And even if you weren't innocent, he's completely chatty. And if you were the guilty party and he had a co-conspirator, you would be worried as heck that this guy's going to talk, because he doesn't seem to have any common sense to keep his mouth shut. And but to me, getting back to my view, if he were guilty, I mean, the reason I can't believe he's guilty is he's not keeping his mouth shut at all. He wants to be heard. He wants to be talking because he realizes something big is happening, and he may be blamed for something he didn't do, and better keep talking. Better keep proclaiming your innocence, or you're going to be railroaded down, how people get into hysteria. He sees that's going on. It's already a mania. I mean, that's not the calmest situation you've ever seen in your life. So he is fighting for his life by telling, I think, the truth under the circumstances of extreme pressure. I mean, he is under extreme pressure that this is basically a mob. So he, now if he said I killed the president, that'd be a whole nother thing. Of course, I guess he could be afraid there too. But in this situation, he's also literally being put under a vice. So anyway, that's how I view this arrest and this situation. So it's very much like, what will the government have to do now when the evidence is conclusive, and it is, that there was a conspiracy of some sort? We just have to find the bad guys who did it. Or do we want to whitewash this and say he acted alone, which is the Warren Commission's final conclusion? Well, we needed, for the peace of the country and maybe for other political reasons, we didn't want to expose anything, so we just chalked it up to what was this. The report of the Warren Commission was that he did it on impulse and out of grief. In 1964, that was the Warren Commission's report. Jack Ruby, did it out of grief for the President of the United States. Pretty amazing conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there, and I'll come right back. Okay, and now we're going to use the same logic we were using on the Kennedy assassination. If the Trinity doctrine were true, what else must be true? Well, Constantine would not need to threaten banishment of any bishop who disagreed. But in fact, he ordered 5 who dissented to be banished. Why would that be true? Because in fact, Trinitarians knew their argument was false or too weak to prove was true. Therefore, you have to use force. You see? So if you believe the Trinity doctrine is true, and it is true and provable, you don't need to use force, and you don't need to banish people if they won't agree. But that's exactly what happens. And now watch what happens. Just like the Warren report is going to be doctored to ignore the fact of the Ruby assassination of Oswald happened, act like it didn't happen, just simply say, oh, he was upset emotionally, not insane, but he was in grief over the loss of the president, with no evidence at all. As if that could explain why you would go and put yourself on death row by shooting and killing someone. You must have been paid off big time, so your family would be well off. Anyway, I just want you to read how Wikipedia. Now, this Wikipedia can sometimes be controlled by even forces that are not liberal. So a lot of people think they're only only liberal forces. No, conservatives can get in there because basically they are open to people who are scholarly, who will say whatever they have to say. But you're going to read here the biggest lie on earth. So I just want you to hear it first on Wikipedia, so that then I can show you the truth, and then you go, what's going on here? The Orthodox bishops won approval of every one of their proposals. This is at Council of Nicea article regarding the Creed. After being in session for an entire month, the Council promulgated on 19 June the original Nicene Creed. This profession of faith was adopted by all the bishops, quote, but 2 from Libya who had been closely associated with Arius from the beginning. So they're claiming only 2 out of 200-something dissented. And then listen to this. No explicit historical record of their dissent actually exists. Well, that's interesting. So two dissented, but there's no record of it? So why would there be no record of a dissent? Were you destroying the dissent? You want to make it look more unanimous than it was? But even this is false, just to show you. The signatures of these bishops are simply absent from the creed. The sessions continue to deal with minor matters until the 25th of August. Doesn't that sound like a voluntary conference where there's no pressure being put on us at all? It's free will. We're going to make this decision completely out of our own, free will and based on biblical study and examining and debating the script and the scripture. And we're going to come to an assessment that cannot be disputed, or at least it's, we can agree upon. Let's see what's going on here. Well, when we go over to Wikiversity, which is still associated with Wikipedia, apparently, it mentions one person who doesn't do as well as that would lead you to believe the Wikipedia article, and this is undisputed as well. The fate of Arius. Arius was banished. This is the guy who said that Colossians 1:15 is true, 1:15, 16, 17 is true, that Jesus was begotten, was the first begotten of creation, and then he then created all things through all things were created through him and by him and with him, and there was nothing made without him, or something like that. So that's what loses. Arius loses, and he's going to be banished for that view, a region on the eastern coast of the Adriatic, and all copies of his writings were ordered to be burned. So this is free speech, and this is freedom of thought, and no persecution whatsoever of the opposing point of view. Anyone found guilty of concealing his writings would be kept out of church? No. Suffer excommunication? No. Put to death? Oh my gosh, you can't even possess anything he wrote? What about Colossians 1:15, 16, and 17? He's only defending those propositions in that passage. Why? What are we going to do with that? Should we throw our books out, our Bibles out? Because that's really the only thing that Arius was relying upon for his point of view, that Jesus was begotten creature in time. That's what Paul said. He was the firstborn of all creation, and he's going to have his books all burned, and anyone who holds any of his books with those words in them are going to be killed. That's apparently what's going to happen. But if these draconian measures were intended to silence him, they were unsuccessful, for he continued to write and teach in exile. So if you keep reading the article, they're saying this guy was stubborn. You couldn't stop this guy. So, as if he should give up all his free speech because they're willing to persecute him. I even though I don't agree with Paul, I hate what Paul writes in Colossians 1:15. That is so horrible against God, making someone else a co-creator when he says no one created with me. So it's wrong, it's false, it's contradictory to 6 different scriptures in Isaiah and many places in the original covenant scriptures. Even so, I defend his right to say them and quote Paul if he wants, and I would refute him with the Bible. But I'm not gonna order people who hold his writings be put to death. But this is what's going on at the Council of Nicea, and we have to follow what's going on. It's not just what happens there; it's what the orders are about, the consequences of pursuing any freedom of thought in this area. Okay, so let's keep going here. I want to show you a little bit more. Okay, wait, before we do this. Yeah, I wanted to show you this. There's a book by Socrates Scholasticus. It was completed after 439 AD. So he was a serious Christian scholar who collected the materials from Nicaea, and he did a history. And he did a history on the whole Christian church. He's the second Eusebius, and nobody questions that he has no bias. He doesn't take sides. He just summarizes what's happening. And he records from what he had, 5 only would not receive it, the Nicene Creed, objecting to the term homoousios, which is this idea that Jesus can have the same substance as the Father, and that makes Jesus eternal because he has this shared substance of the same essence, or consubstantial. These 5 who wouldn't receive it were Eusebius, Bishop of Nicomedia, Theonius of Nice, Maurice of Chalcedon, Theonis of Marmarica, and Secundus of Ptolemais. For they said, since this is consubstantial, which is from another, either by partition, derivation, or germination, by germination as a shoot from the roots, by derivation as children from their parents, by division as 2 or 3 vessels of gold from a mass, and the Son is from the Father by none of these modes, therefore they declared themselves unable to assent to this creed. In other words, it's saying God does not have any materiality. It's not how you transmit, plants and animals and children. That's materiality. They're trying to say you can't make God material, and therefore can transmit his being to another person the way you would transmit substance, like with plants and animals, and that kind of stuff. So, and then it says this. So therefore they declared themselves unable to assent to this creed, thus hating, scoffed at the word consubstantial. So they're haters. They're hating this word consubstantial, like they're doing something wrong. They would not subscribe to the deposition of Arius, meaning deposing Arius from being a bishop. So now if you don't go along with him being removed from office and take his job away from him, on top of everything else, what's gonna happen to you? Upon this, the synod, so that's the group of the bishops, anathemized Arius, meaning cursed him, sent him to hell by decree, and all who would adhere to his opinions. So that means all these 5 other guys, his opinions, prohibiting him at the same time from entering into Alexandria. So Arius lives in Alexandria, so now he's not allowed to go home or teach or preach or do anything he used to do in his old hometown. At the same time, an edict of the emperor, that means Constantine, what does this wonderful, gentle, kind Christian emperor do? He sent Arius himself into exile together with Eusebius and Theonius and their followers. So all 5 of those men have to all go into exile. And exile means you're being ordered outside the realm of the Roman Empire, and that meant you were basically going to be sent outward towards the barbarians, which were in the northern part of England. And that was preliminary. That was basically a death sentence. So if you went all the way there, you could make the trip even and tried to live in that area, and you were from Rome, you should be killed by, at least a few months later, and your life is over. And you're never allowed to come back, and you lose all your family, all your possessions, everything that you've built your whole life on. That is the freedom of speech that they had when they were there. So don't tell me that the Trinitarian people who were behind it believed in their doctrine, because you don't need to use force. If it's truth you're defending, just convince us. Tell us that Colossians 1, 15, 16, 17 doesn't apply, because that's all the Arians were claiming. That's all they were defending, that Christ was the first begotten of creation, and through him all things were created. Now, I don't agree with that, but I would defend their right not to be banished. If they want to rely upon Paul, that's their privilege to rely upon it. They don't have to consent to something that doesn't make any sense. That God and Jesus have the same substance, as if they had materiality. They were the only rational people in the room. They were the only, and I mean rational in the sense of not crazy. The Trinitarian party was adopting Constantine's crazy idea that Jesus is eternal because he had the same substance, as if there was some fluid that could pass through them, some materiality, when God is a spirit. Constantine had a pagan view, and he's the one who came up with that doctrine of homoousios. And he even boasts in a letter to all the bishops. When it was all over, he writes a letter to all the bishops who couldn't make it, and he says, hey, by the way, I came up with the solution of the homoousios, and that was the Jesus has the same substance, and he's true God from true God, blah, 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 blah. And that is the solution of Constantine. A pagan made us do that. All right. Now I want to now explain a little bit more about how this ties into the point I was making about the Kennedy assassination and how that whitewashing happened. And now we've shown you this terrible whitewashing I showed you already about the Nicene Conference. Lies, right? No, it was unanimous. There were 2 people who dissented, but that isn't even recorded. And it was like there's no pressure at all here. But watch what really goes on in Nicaea is the forward momentum towards persecution and execution and death and destruction if you don't go along with the Nicene Creed and the Trinity, and basically what later will be known as the Trinity doctrine. This is by deity in 325. So let me just read this to you. I'm going to stop here for a second, and we'll come back. Okay, so this is an article by Pamela Gaskell, December 2009, Council of Nicea, Constantine's Sword or Shield, page 68. The problem with the Council of Nicea goes to the heart of early Christianity, the willingness to silence opposition through excommunication and banishment, effectively poisons and eliminates theological debates and tolerance. Gone is the flexibility to understand and interpret the scripture and the person of Christ in different ways, yet still remaining under the umbrella of Christianity. Rather than allowing debate to arise and be resolved naturally in the church, future emperors and bishops relied on violence to subdue all opposition. Wow. It says it all in a small packet. So we are supposed to violently resolve our disputes and not work them out. And these are just theological disputes. They're not about a dispute about church property or something that, this is about stuff that people can have different opinions based on what's scripture. And we haven't even settled the canon at this point. There is no settled canon, by the way. The Catholic Church will tell you that too. There is no settled canon until 1543, despite all the best efforts of some of our Protestant evangelical pastors will tell you, well, this conference over here at Hippo, which is only a provincial conference, but we're not going to tell the people that. And there's this other conference over here, and that's another provincial conference, but we're not going to tell people that. We're going to make it sound like it's a universal decision. And so you have these decisions that are being made that are not actually decisions by the church as a whole. They're by just some just small geographical areas, and that's being presented to Christians today as if we'd made a decision. No, the only universal decision that was ever made in the church after the Ebionites made it, and the Ebionites, we record what they put down as the canon, and we've told you that before, what that is. But after the Ebionite canon, the only next canon is from 1543 by the Roman Catholic Church for the universal church. And that's the only canon ever decided. So why don't we try to get a new canon conference and make sure that we get this worked out? What is the Christian canon? And so we don't have any persecution. What else? The Nicene Creed attempted to eradicate Christians who failed to acknowledge the divinity of Jesus and the Trinity. The established creed set forth prescribed words and phrases that prohibited an alternative interpretation. So you were given a set of phrases and words that you could use, and a set of phrases and words you couldn't use. Do you see that? They're trying to control your thought. The very process of being able to think was being impeded. Now, by the way, are these the kind of people who want to go back and censor words and books and change them in hindsight? Yes, because they have no morals. To put this on Christians, even in the time period we're talking about, is ridiculously immoral and wrong, right? To go back, but if you're doing it to people alive, you're going to just go backwards. Go back, and we'll rewrite all these guys. We'll rewrite Origen. He was anti-Trinitarian. No, let's turn him into a Trinitarian. That's exactly what Rufinus did. It's now provable, and we're going to put another video out on that. Maybe that'll be the very next one. So we get to see the despicable nature of the Trinitarian leaders of the church, not Trinitarians who are dupes and who are defrauded of their own ability to make reasoned decisions. No, we who believed in the Trinity, I did too as a child, were part of the victims of this evil conspiracy towards defrauding us to believe something that isn't true. And I'm going to show you how we're going to go through the major frauds on the Bible in a minute. But we need to keep reading here. So slashing the opposition, the Nicene Creed instituted a method to determine whether Christians adhere to the accepted conventions of the church. So this is brand new. Now there's going to be litmus tests. Those who did not were excommunicated and banished from the empire. So this is going forward. So there was pressure at the Nicene Conference that if you didn't agree to this, you would be banished, right? And that's covered up in that first summary from Wikipedia. They acted like that never happened. They didn't mention it. Okay. And then you see the actual decrees are to actually set in motion for all time in the future. If you don't go along with this by deity at this point creed, you will be excommunicated and you will be banished from the empire, which is a death sentence. Now, this is in the same article. According to Socrates Scholasticus, so this is a guy writing in 479 approximately, all the bishops present, except for 5, subscribed to the confession of faith. Although more hesitated at first, they did concede in order to avoid excommunication. The unyielding bishops did not accept the creed because they objected to the term, and listen to this, how reasonable they were being. The term homoousios, of the same essence, or consubstantial, in explaining the relationship between God and Jesus. The dissenters would not yield that Jesus was not created and of the same substance as God. The inability of the dissenting bishops to accept the term homoousios was because the word was a Greek philosophical term that Eusebius argued was associated with the heresy of Sabellius. And more importantly, the term was not used in Scripture. The few dissenters could not derail the move towards orthodoxy. And I should say, to a new orthodoxy. The Nicene Creed set in motion a force that would no longer tolerate dissenters viewed to be spreading heresy. With the Council of Nicaea, the Orthodox Catholic Church was born. And that's right. There was no Roman Catholic Church as we know it today. It did not exist before Constantine destroyed the true original Roman Church. And that's why Sylvester was basically implicitly disinvited. The Roman bishop, the Bishop of Rome, could not make it to where Constantine decided this meeting would take place because he was too old and infirm. So instead of making it suitable that the Bishop of Rome, the most important bishop of the Christian church, he wasn't present because it was set in Nicaea instead of at Rome. And Constantine had two offices. He could have easily met at Rome to accommodate our bishop of Rome, but he didn't. So he excluded the true bishop of the church, and that bishop of Rome, who we now would call Pope, he never signs the Council of Nicaea articles. So to continue to our points and get to our conclusion, if the Trinity doctrine were true, you would not need force and banishment at Nicaea or later, and they have both. They use force and excommunication and banishment at the Council of Nicaea, and they used it later to anybody who got out of line. The same punishments were used later. And now, if the Trinity doctrine were true, you would not need to do the following 5 frauds upon Scripture. 1, you wouldn't have Jerome deleting from Matthew and Luke at the same time the words "this day I begotten thee" at the baptism, because it conflicts with the eternal Son doctrine in Nicaea. All right, so we've dealt with that previously with you all. Let's see. Yes, you remember this is in Luke 3:22, for example, the quotation of the words in Psalm 2, spoken from heaven, "This day I begotten thee," which Justin Martyr introduces into the divine salutation, is only supported by Codex D, okay, they claim, and some MSS's manuscripts of the italic, I mean, that's the Latin from the 200s. It can, and this person doesn't like it. So I'm showing you the standard line. Oh, well, it's much more simpler to not have anything about "this day I begotten thee." But the reason it was being taken out is Bishop Faustus won or beat Augustine in a written debate using letters where he's quoting Matthew and Luke, saying, "This day I begotten thee" happened at Jesus' baptism. Therefore, he didn't become a son of God as an eternal son. He became a son of God at his baptism. And God did that purposely to indicate he was the Messiah, because the passage of Psalm 2 is being quoted is one of the only 2 passages in the scripture predicting or talking about the Messiah. So, God has to tell us, here's the proof. I'm going to invoke it. I'm going to quote it, Psalm 2, and now you know that Jesus is the Messiah. How else are we going to prove Jesus is the Messiah? So this just gets deleted without thinking, because it offends the Nicene Creed. We're going to take it out. It should never be done, right? And so here's some extra evidence on that. Codex Versalis has it and other things. And then Justin has it. He died in 165, and he has it, and he's claiming it's from the apostles, the very Christ wrote, and he has it. "This day I begotten thee, thou art my son, this day I begotten thee." So it's in Justin Martin, Dialogue with Trifo, chapter 88. Take a look. Okay, now I just want to go back. So so that's fraud number 1. Fraud number 2 is adding verse 7 to verse 1 John chapter 5, verse 7 to 8. So what was the verse that was fraudulently added? This one on the left. This is a completely concocted version. What it did is it took the true verse, which is verse 8, and it didn't have the words Father or Word or Unity or any of that. So they just added Father, the Word, and Holy Trinity, Holy, and then One, and you end up with this verse. And they just concocted it out of whole cloth in the 10th century. Okay, so that goes. That has to go eventually, one of these days. So what's the other frauds? The third fraud, they added the baptismal formula of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to Matthew 28:19. So let's take a quick look at that. Let's see. It's this one. You can look at all the Bibles, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But we showed you, just as one example, is Eusebius, his church historian, in his church history, the history of the church, written prior to Nicaea, 17 times he quotes this passage. It just says in his name, in his name, meaning Jesus. "Therefore, go make all nations in my name" is actually what it says originally. And it's clear. So how could Eusebius quoted 17 times to get it wrong 17 times in a row? And only after Nicaea, it switches to this. Right? It makes no sense. And so then it ends up corrupted like this in the Vulgate 405. And of course, all the Greek Bibles after that conform. So if the Trinity doctrine were true, you would not need this fraud in Matthew 28:19, would you? You wouldn't even think about it. Why contaminate the chance that anybody would see that you're liars you Trinitarian authorities, you're liars and you're using despicable means. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't delete the passage of Luke 3:22 and the corresponding passage in Matthew with this day begotten, except you can't stand anyone proving that Jesus was not begotten eternally, but was begotten the Son at his baptism. You can't stand that, right? That's really the truth. And you add this phony verse in 1 John 5:7 because you're liars. That's what you are. These Trinitarian leaders, government people. They were all sycophants serving Constantine, and there was a whole tribe of them. And that's why we were all victims when we were children. We were given this thing. It was fraudulent from the get-go. Let's see, what more do we have? Okay, and we showed that in Matthew 5 verses chapter 19 verse 16, instead of being good teachers, it always had been. And like over here in the Authorized King James, they got rid of the word good out of good teacher, good master, and now it became just teacher. And they got rid of why calls me good, and they turned into why do you ask me about the good? What is good? So these are just frauds, more frauds. And then we found this passage in Matthew 19 verse 17. So we have basically right now in the NIV, it'll read, there is only one who is good, and but that's a bad version. It should say none is good, but my Father who is in heaven. That would send definitely a great message, consistent with the John 17:1-3, completely devastating the Trinity, because Jesus is saying in context, you can't worship me by calling me good, because none is good but my Father who is in heaven. So therefore he is excluding himself from being worshipfully called good, in the sense that he's God. Of course, he's our good shepherd, things that are not roles that are only God can do, but humans can also play roles. Then he can be good as a human. But when you're worshiping and you're calling Jesus God, because this fellow kneels in front of Jesus and apparently had a worship intention, Jesus is reproving him, says, no, none is good. Do not call me good. Only one is good. None is good, but my Father who is in heaven. And we found 4 different letters or early church writings that confirmed that was how it originally read. And look how pathetic it looks now. No Father, no heaven, none is good but one. I mean, you just have a very dead version of it now. It's been destroyed, basically. And that's so if the Trinity doctrine were true, you would not need frauds on Matthew 19:17. So you wouldn't have needed the removal of the word good teacher, or taking away, why do you call me good, and changing it in Matthew to what is good. And you wouldn't need to remove the I have begotten thee out of the baptism account, because it conflicts with the Nicene eternal Son doctrine. You wouldn't have added the verse 7 the verse 7 about the water, the Word, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and the Father all agree in one. I mean, a totally made up verse. And you wouldn't put in the baptismal formula, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is totally made up. We have proof it never existed until after Nicea. So all these frauds would not be necessary if the Trinity doctrine were true and defensible. But you don't think it's your leaders, the people who created the Trinity doctrine, the bi-deity conclusion in Nicea, they did not have any confidence that you would believe them. So they had to use punishments, and they had to use fraud and deception and deceit and manipulation of text, and moving things around, and just manipulating everywhere. I mean, this is not small potatoes, everybody. This is a systematic, coercive effect on the human mind, no different than the Warren Commission report. Just don't look over here. Yes, I know that Ruby shot and killed Oswald a couple days later, but you know what? He was just in grief over losing his president, even though we have no proof of that. But that's what we're going to tell you. We're going to convince you. And if you think anything else, you're a conspiracy theorist, and you don't deserve to even be heard. And the truth is, the real ruling there should be that it's a murder case that was never closed. We don't know that Oswald did it, and we do not know that he had no co-conspirators. In fact, we know he must have had a co-conspirator, because there's no reason for Ruby to shoot and murder him within 2 days and to take all those chances unless he was indeed covering up for someone else or paid big money for it, and it was worth the risk to him. So, okay, everyone. So I hope we see the parallels. Cover-up report number 1 was the Nicene Creed. We saw how horrible that was. That was very unanimous. There was two people that didn't go along, but they didn't. It's not even recorded anywhere. They didn't go along, and And it was just this, rational, reasonable, consensual decision is what the impression is if you read the Wikipedia summary. So somebody who's totally deranged wrote that because they don't either. They're totally no, it's somebody who doesn't want to hear any of the counter story, and so they just disregard. There's this very detailed description of the Nicene Conference by Socrates Scholasticus. Okay, and to finish off our entire video, I'm going to now show you Lee Harvey Oswald being assassinated on camera on national television at point blank range. So what's going to end up happening with the killing of Oswald is it's going to be a textbook setup, just like it was with Serpico. Here's a guy who been doing informing for many years against the cops, and now they're going to set him up. He's just he sensed it was coming. Two guys he doesn't know are signed on a case with him. Doesn't know them, but they know him, but he doesn't know them. Cop 1 and 2 say, hey, let's go up there and you make a buy and we'll arrest the guy for buying drugs off you. Simple, easy. Serpico has to be unarmed and he has no weapon because he's the one who's the buyer. He can't be inspected and be found to have drugs on him. So he's got to play the role to the end. So cop 1 and 2 are right there, right next to him. Now, all they need to do is get him to get the door open, and they're promising to rush in. What do? They stand back, and they let him get shot in the face. That's how you get rid of the guy you don't like. How do you do it with in the case of the president? You've got to get the shooter so close that he can make a deadly shot on one try. He cannot fail. He has to be right up against the guy. And we're going to play for you actually the clip of the medical surgeon who was in charge of the surgery, and he explains where the entrance wound is in the upper abdomen, left side. Where's your heart? So the shot was exactly right into his heart cavity, fatal. And the doctor says it's a fatal wound, but you need to hear it because it's the key evidence of why. And then when you see the video, you can just see it's a Serpico killing. It's a setup.
He never regained consciousness at all. In fact, before surgery, we had no blood pressure, a few agonal respiratory efforts, and that was all. During the operation, once we got control of the major vessels, the aorta, the vena cava, the kidney injury, we had a blood pressure for a time, but then we had the cardiac arrest, which was obviously incident to massive blood loss, the anoxia that had occurred. This was again a fatal wound that he received.
Was there ever any chance for him to recover?
Well, there's always a chance as long as you have signs of life, and we had at least a heartbeat preoperatively, so there was a slight chance. So we.
What was your impression when you first saw him, though? Did you have any hope on your first impression for recovery?
Not much, although again, there's always a chance. The course of the bullet wound through the upper abdomen was such one could feel the bullet under the skin on the right side, the entrance wound in the upper abdomen on the left side. We've guessed that he had injured all the major vessels in the between space, and sure enough, he had.
Okay, and the next point of reference and a obvious setup for an execution right in front of your eyes is, look at this scene. The car is going to pull up here on the left. I should have the arrow pointing there. He's only got to go about 15, 20 feet. The detectives are all lined up in plain clothes on this side. You've got this one journalist here, and you have the mysterious killer standing right next to that person. So what's the job of the people to get Oswald from that building into that car at all costs? Meaning, in normal police activity, with an assassin of the President of the United States, with international affairs affected, this guy's a communist. He's married to a woman from the Soviet Union. He's defected before. I mean, you can't let this guy get killed. You've got to defend his life with your life. And now watch what happens.
You get the mic.
Okay, I just want to freeze frame it there for a minute. So now we have a last minute guy whose job, what is it, to check that you have credentials to be in this area. So we would keep everyone out of the area except maybe this one media reporter. But everybody else goes. And then a nightclub owner, the last person on earth we want here. Get out of here. There's no reason to have him there. He can't do anything except kill the person who just killed the president 2 days earlier and silence all the evidence that goes with him and put him into his grave. That's the only thing that can go wrong here. Get this guy out of there. That's the only thing that should be in this guy's head. But no, he's acting like there's nothing, no big deal. I don't care about that guy. I don't care about a guy who's running a nightclub in the middle of nowhere and is our snitch with criminals. Well, he hangs out with criminals, and that's what we depend upon him to be in touch with criminal elements. This is the right guy for me to leave right here in this spot. Just I'm going to act like I don't notice him.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to concern photographers.
He has been shot. Oswald has been shot.
Lee Oswald.
Oswald has been
We're
shot.
going to switch now.
Police.
Okay, and since I once had to hire a bodyguard when I went to court one day for entry, just so I wouldn't get killed, and I can just tell you, you need to make sure the guy who's protecting you is between you and the shooter. So the guy with the white hat is supposed to be the main guy protecting him. He's on the wrong side. He's got to be on this side of Lee Harvey Oswald, not on the side where the other detectives are. Do you think the other detectives are going to shoot him? No, you're worried about somebody in this direction going to shoot him. But no, nobody's. Look at all the people on the other side. They're looking at the car that's coming in. But the guy who's supposed to protect him is on the wrong side. Your defender has to be on the front of you so you can't be killed. That's the whole point. And that's the whole point of this whole charade of bringing him down here in the garage. If you want to have him killed, just walk him out in the front of the building or do this. Pretend that you're protecting him and then do exactly what they did to Serpico. Just stand back enough that they can get a clear shot, no interference whatsoever, and kill him. Because this was an execution right in the public's face. And it's just such an obvious thing. It's just too obvious to believe that nobody ever... I've dissected this scene, and if you just know any elemental ideas of how to protect someone in police custody, it is not standing on his wrong side. And you don't let the public, you don't let petty criminals right in front of you to be within this distance from this guy to the assassin of the president of the United States 2 days earlier. They think we are fools, and yet this is done right in front of us, and nobody says anything. Nobody even points to the most obvious facts. They're all looking at the shooting of the president. This is the shooting. This is the shooting. You have it on tape. You know exactly who did it, what happened, and what wasn't being done to protect the defendant, who had never been actually given any legal counsel. He was trying to get legal counsel, and they denied him that, which might have protected him from this fiasco. So there was a whole sequence of things where this department was setting him up. And if you think police departments can't be corrupted, you don't understand the Serpico case. And the Serpico case is two lessons in one. How can police be corrupted? And how can you set somebody up for murder and you're a cop? And you'd say, oh, cops don't do that. Well, I'm going to tell you, the man who was supposed to be guarding him virtually admits what he did. So look at the shot here, by the way. I mean, point blank range. James Lavelle is the cop right there, the homicide detective. Do you think he's actually studying the face of this man? He can see the gun. He's taking no defensive action for his person he's supposed to be protecting. Very strange. Don't you think this behavior is bizarre? And the New York Times, in this article, this guy dies not too long ago. He had a stricken glower. What does that mean? It's like, oh, I'm surprised that somebody's trying to shoot my client here that I'm supposed to be protecting. Now, what's that about? Well, let's listen to what he himself records this, and this is in the New York Times article I just found there. Moments earlier, he, Lavelle, and Mr. Oswald had an eerie exchange. Mr. Lavelle often later recounted. Lee, meaning he's talking to Lee Harvey Oswald, Lavelle is, he recalled saying, "If anybody shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you." Now, what is, in a joking way, he's saying, "I hope if they try to shoot you, they don't shoot me." Well, see, that's the whole problem here is your job is to get shot and him not be shot. That's the idea of being in police custody. You are now responsible if that guy gets shot. In essence, theoretically, you could lose your job if he gets killed, right? And more importantly, the national security depends upon we getting an investigation of what happened with this guy, and he's declaring he didn't even do it. So what's really going on here? He's telling you, I wanted him to get shot, not me. That's all he's telling you, which that's why he's not defending him? Is that why he's standing back, pretending like he had no assignment to protect this guy? And look at the proximity of Jack Ruby, and he's shooting him right in the left chest. He knows exactly where he has to go. He's getting it right up against his chest. He's already fired it. So the sound has gone off, and this guy over here, Lavelle, is just he's not even frightened. He is not even frightened. It's like, my good buddy, take care of your job, then I'll grab you, but you got to get this done. Boom. So right at the very moment, you can see the culpability of the detective himself. He is guilty as sin. That is not the look of a man who is worried, has any concerns he's going to be shot. Do you see any fear on his face that this man's going to shoot him? Not the slightest fear. In fact, he looks like he's almost smiling. Take a look at the reaction. People cannot lie under stress at this point. I mean, they're the last thing they think is they're going to be shot in a photograph, a perfect photograph of the very moment the gun is right in this guy's chest, and you will be shown how poorly you protected this man. I mean, poorly isn't even the word. It's no protection. And there's another guy to the right of him, but he doesn't seem to have any authority in this situation. This was his task, was to walk him out. And you can even see they're having a conversation back and forth. But he's standing on the wrong side. He should have been between him and this guy, because all the other detectives are behind or to the on the right side, right arm of Lee Harvey Oswald. They're on the wall. This side is the side that needed protection. The side that was exposed to whatever the police, not the police, the press bay there. There was one man there, but there seemed to be a little bit of license there that there could be people other than the police. So there's that reporter, in fact, the news station that's broadcasting this live to the entire country. So this is caught on camera to the entire nation. And I actually remember watching this as a child. I was a kid. I was cleaning the house. I saw the assassination 2 days earlier. We were all glued to our TVs for days, and you were waiting to see he's going to be taken to the criminal defense building and whatever. And this is what you then all see live. This is unbelievable. But it was not what it was never told to us what's really going on here. No one's ever dissected this. And it's so obvious when you just dissect it. And sometimes things take time. This photograph is something that, you have to see to make the whole picture fit. And then this tells the whole story right in one shot. All right, so let me tie it all together. So we have a very similar pattern between the Warren Report and the summaries of the Nicene Conference, both intended to mislead us and deflect us by using narratives, false narratives, misleading narratives, so that we don't see the truth, and they try to play us as for fools. Okay, so I think we can see we're being all played for fools, that that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that nobody else was involved in a conspiracy to kill the president. And you can see the stand back going on right there. It's right in front of our face. The stand back of the cops, just like happened to Serpico when he was snitching on the cops. Not snitching. He was actually giving testimony in public about cops being on the take in the Bronx and Manhattan, and I think in Brooklyn too. So he was hated. He was hated, but he was standing up for what he believed was right, and he was being encouraged by the mayor's office. So he was doing what he was supposed to do. Same thing here. The Trinitarians. If you thought that if these founders of the Trinity doctrine, the bideity and Trinity doctrine of Jesus, thought it was true, they did not need to use deadly coercion at Nicea. Just use your Bible verses, convince them. And frankly, at that time there were none. Most of the verses, the 5 frauds, were made up afterwards. In fact, I think they all were. Yeah, I'm pretty sure all of them were made up after Nicaea. So there was no verses. So the things that you think you see there, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the blood, water, and Holy Spirit agree. These are all made up centuries later. And all the corruptions that were made to Matthew 19, verse 17, that's all later. These people are reading the passages that I'm telling you about. And John 17, 1-3 is quoted in Nicaea in its correct form. And in fact, it's part of the first verse, first two or three lines of the Nicene Creed. And what happened is they were told that Constantine's going to solve the problem. He says there's a substance. God has substance. He's not a spiritual being. He's a material being, and he has a substance. And so he's consubstantial with Jesus, and Jesus has substance. The Father has substance, and that substance is eternal. And therefore, Jesus, even though he appears later, he had an eternal substance that really means he existed before his own appearance physically. He existed eternally with God, so he's an eternal Son of God. Therefore, we can believe Jesus is God the Son and not just Son of God. And that's not Bible verses. None of it is. And the dissent from this view was to say, and I showed you earlier, Socrates recorded them, this isn't biblical. There is no biblical doctrine of the substance of God is in the substance of Jesus, right? And so there's nothing to defend that. And what was the main other verse of the Arian party? And I have a whole video on this. It was this passage from Paul. Paul says Jesus is the image of the invisible God in Colossians 1, verse 15, 17, the firstborn of every creature. So he's a created being in time. And when was he created? He was created before all other things, and which then in turn Jesus helps create, or maybe he's even the direct creator. It says, for by him were all things created. So that would seem to me make Jesus the next creator, okay, that are in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions, etc. He's before all things, and by him all things consist. So according to Paul, God's not actually our Father. It's Jesus who's our Father, okay? That's the only weird thing if you read it. Now, if you study carefully, where did Paul get this idea? He and Barnabas are quoting a passage, and it's more obvious when you read the epistle to the Hebrews. Okay, so it's actually Psalms 45 and 102, 45 verses 6-7, and Psalm 102, 23-25. When you combine those errors, you get Hebrews 1 verses 9-10 in the NIV reading. But about the Son, he says, instead of about God the Father, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever. A scepter of justice will be a scepter of your kingdom. Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, God, even thy God, has anointed thee with the oil of gladness. So this seems to be talking about the Son, but when you go back into the text, the Son is not addressed as a God, but that's how it looks in the Septuagint Greek. And then when you take Psalm 102, you get the Lord speaking to another Lord, meaning God Yahweh speaks to another Lord and says, thou Lord in the beginning has laid the foundations of the earth. So when you put you torture 102 and Psalm 45 together, both in their mistranslated form in the Greek Septuagint, you get the very doctrine we're reading in Colossians 1, 15, 16, 17, which is repeated again here in Hebrews 1, verses 9-10. But in the corrupted version of the Septuagint, the word Adonai was thought to be God the Father. So God the Father is speaking to another creator, that you are the creator of the heavens and earth. And so this is where this came from. It's a corruption of the Septuagint Bible. Paul believes that the Septuagint Bible is valid. It's crazy, but that's what he believes. And that's how this ends up being a position of Arius, but it gets shot down in favor of this idea that Jesus has a material substance in common with the Father. And that's how you get around the fact of John 17, 1-3, the Father is the only true God. Well, it doesn't matter because Jesus has the materiality that exists in God's body. And you would say that's pagan. And that's exactly the position. I quoted you. Socrates said the position of the dissenters from the winning view at Nicea, the winning view is that Jesus and God have the same substance. In fact, it says so still in the Nicene Creed. The same substance, true God from true God, begotten, not made. Boom. So he's not made because he had this eternal substance from eternity. So that was Constantine's contribution. He even summarized it in a letter to all bishops who hadn't made it. That's what it was, his brilliant idea, the homoousios doctrine, which is completely pagan in every way. And so the dissenters were correct. It's pagan. God doesn't have any substance, and that's ridiculous. You have to have a Bible verse that would make Jesus God. You don't have one. And you have the refutation of it correctly made by Arius with these two verses, John 17, 1-3. First verse he started with. Second verse was Colossians 1, 15, 17. While I would never rely upon Paul for anything, and particularly on the nature of Jesus Christ being an angel, basically, who created the heavens and earth, and God isn't our Father. No, we can't go with Paul. Just be honest. I'm going to be honest. But the point is that this is what loses, and they don't even tell you that. They don't even have the guts to tell you Paul loses the argument, and he's the Arian position. But more importantly, they misrepresent that this reflected all positions. The majority position, I believe, would have been, if there was freedom, is what Jesus says. Jesus says, the Father dwells in me. I can do nothing of my own. The Father's greater than I. The Father and I are one in the sense of agreement, just as I'm praying in the very next sentence. I pray that all those you've given me, that they will be one as even as you and I, the Father, are one. So Jesus wasn't praying that all Christians would be one in some human head that would synthesize all of our being into one super being called humanity, because that's what they want you to believe when it says Jesus says, I and the Father are one, that it's now a super Godhead of two beings in one being still called God as one being. So no, if Jesus is saying that we're all one, he's praying that all of us are one, even as he and the Father are one. It cannot be that the word one there means one physical being. It means one in agreement on things, that we are one in objective or direction. That's all that could possibly mean because of the next sentence. So I don't think anybody would have been fooled by that argument that God is one, had any idea that Jesus was now one God with the one God. Oh my gosh. That would be violating everything in Scripture. God is very clear. There was no one with me when I created the heavens and the earth, and we have it all backwards. So you see, this is the problem. We have a report of the Nicene Conference that is deliberately misleading, just like we have a Warren report. And we, the people in the pew, are supposed to just accept these things without questioning. And that's not what our job is. Our job is to question, to know the truth. And this is not an insignificant question on the issue of the Trinity or bi-deity, because if we're wrong, we are idolaters. We are putting a second God, who is a human being, in place of giving all of our worship to one God, who is our creator and is the Father of all things. The problem with Paul's view, to look back at it again, is that he actually ascribes the role for by him were all things created. By Jesus, all things were created other than himself. Doesn't give any role for God the Father to do any fathering of us. So Jesus has become our Father if you are a Pauline Christian. And a Pauline Christian has to actually reject the Trinity as officially proclaimed, where the Father is the Father of mankind. No, they have to reject that, and they have to still accept that Jesus is a created being before, and so that God the Father had to come before him. So, that's the Arian position, and that's what it's saying. So the Pauline Christians are Arians, okay? And Trinitarians are Constantinians, because there is no doctrine of Jesus being God apart from, there are no verses. And then you don't have the five fraudulent verses, five frauds to the Scripture I've shown you. So, yeah, you have nothing to base the Trinity on except force, brute force, deadly coercion, fraud of verses over time, later, afterwards, and coercion, using all the force of the state to put basically a death penalty on people by banishing them from the kingdom and excommunicating them from the church, depriving them of their home, their home and all their belongings. Basically, when you send people to the barbarian lands, they're not able to take their couches and family with them. I mean, they would have to leave everything behind. It's just the end of all life. So this is just it's just obscene that anyone talks about the Nicene Conference as a voluntary conference. Still to this day, the lie is just put right out in front of you. It's just, we have to stop this. We have to stop the lying, and we want the books written right. Put in Socrates' accounts, and don't write things like this ever again. The council decided against the Arians. The council didn't decide anything. It should read, the Christian church was forced by Constantine to accept a view of God that was pagan and in there, sadly, of 250 people, only 5 people had the courage and the guts to take the risk of banishment, which meant death, certain death for them, but they'd rather die than to submit to this false pagan idea that Jesus and God can be of the same substance. But everybody else was so weak and so feeble, they went with it. That's the true story of Nicaea, and that's how it should be rewritten, with nothing subtracted. Okay, God bless everybody. I hope that helps you understand what is in common between the Kennedy assassination and the Trinitarian things. They both have official reports after the fact that are misleading and false. And don't be fooled. God bless you. Take care. Ciao. Bye.